The morning of June 4, 1942 began like any other sortie over the Central Pacific. Japanese carrier aircraft, having slipped through the American radar net, descended on the USS Yorktown before her own planes could launch. Within minutes, the battleship carrier was crippled, its flight decks shattered, and its hull taking on water faster than damage control could stem it. The loss of Yorktown removed the only remaining American carrier capable of challenging the Japanese strike force that had already sunk the Akagi and Kaga at Pearl Harbor. With no viable platform to project air power from, Admiral Nimitz ordered the surviving carriers, Enterprise and Hornet, to withdraw toward Hawaii. The battle that in our history turned the tide of the Pacific became a decisive Japanese victory. In the weeks that followed, the Imperial Japanese Navy cemented its dominance over the Central and Western Pacific, reshaping strategic calculations for both sides. With naval supremacy assured, the Japanese High Command turned its attention to the islands that formed the defensive perimeter of the United States forward bases. The Aleutian campaign, already underway in May, accelerated. Japanese forces seized Attu and Kiska, extending their reach into the North Pacific and threatening the Alaskan supply line. From there, carrier-borne troops landed on Guam in August, ending American control of the Mariana Archipelago. By late 1942, the Imperial fleet launched amphibious assaults on New Caledonia and began probing the northern coast of Australia. Each conquest tightened a chain of bases that allowed Japanese aircraft to patrol the sea lanes, supplying the Allied war effort across Asia and the South Pacific. The loss of these islands forced the United States to reroute convoys around the Hawaiian archipelago, lengthening voyages and exposing them to greater danger from submarines. The Japanese advance on the Pacific forced a dramatic shift in the Chinese theater. Nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek, already strained by years of fighting both the Japanese invaders and communist rivals, were compelled to retreat further inland. Their defensive line collapsed around Wuhan, and by early 1943, the remnants of the Nationalist Army fell back into the rugged interior of Sichuan and Yunnan provinces. Overland supply routes from Burma, now under Allied control after the successful campaign in 1942, became the only lifeline for Chiang's forces. The United States, preoccupied with defending its own coastlines and unable to mount a large-scale airlift across the Pacific, sent limited material aid, small shipments of ammunition, medical supplies, and a handful of aircraft that could be assembled locally. Chinese resistance persisted, but it was now a protracted guerrilla struggle, isolated from the broader Allied strategy. Across the continent, Moscow watched the unfolding drama with cautious interest. The Soviet Union remained officially neutral toward Japan until August 1945, yet Stalin recognized an opportunity to pressure the Japanese Empire without overextending his own forces on the Eastern Front. In late 1943, he ordered a modest contingent of Siberian troops, trained mountain infantry, and mechanized units to cross into Manchuria via the Trans-Siberian Railway. Their objective was not a full-scale invasion, but a demonstration of force that might compel Japan to negotiate. The Soviet presence in the region forced Japanese commanders to divert resources from their southern offensives, stretching an already stretched supply chain. While the Soviets did not engage directly with American forces, their strategic posture added another variable to the emerging diplomatic calculations. Amid the shifting balance of power, the United States' secret atomic research program entered a critical phase. By mid-1943, the Los Alamos laboratory had achieved a breakthrough in uranium enrichment, and physicists warned that Japan possessed its own nascent nuclear ambitions, spurred by German scientific exchange before the collapse of the European front. The dilemma was stark. Even if an American bomb could be completed, there was no viable delivery system capable of reaching Japanese-held islands across the Pacific without a carrier platform, now unavailable after Midway's loss. Scientists argued for accelerated development of long-range bomber designs, but those aircraft required factories and raw materials already committed to conventional war production. The Manhattan Project thus found itself caught between an urgent strategic need and a logistical reality that left the United States unable to threaten Japan directly with its most powerful new weapon. By early 1944, the conflict had settled into a grim stalemate. Japanese forces held the Central Pacific. The United States defended the Hawaiian Islands and the West Coast, while Soviet troops pressed modestly from Manchuria. The Allied supply lines that once crisscrossed the Pacific were now forced to navigate around the Japanese perimeter, slowing reinforcements to China and stretching logistics thin. In a surprising turn, representatives of the warring powers met in Shanghai under the auspices of neutral Switzerland. Japan entered the talks seeking formal recognition of its conquests, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, extending from the Aleutians to New Caledonia, and an end to Allied interference in its occupied territories. The United States, unable to regain naval superiority and wary of a protracted war that threatened the mainland, proposed a phased withdrawal. Japan would retain its holdings, but would cede control of strategic choke points, such as the Panama Canal Zone and the Philippines, back to the Allies. The Soviets offered to mediate, hoping to secure influence over the Kuril Islands and northern Manchuria in exchange for pressuring Japan toward compromise. The resulting treaty, signed in late 1944, carved the Pacific into distinct spheres of influence. Japan kept its island chain from the Aleutians through the Marianas, securing a defensive perimeter that stretched across half the ocean. The United States retained Hawaii, the West Coast, and regained sovereignty over the Philippines, establishing forward bases there to protect American shipping lanes. Soviet forces were granted control of the Kuril archipelago and a foothold in southern Sakhalin, while a demilitarized zone was established around the Taiwan Strait. China remained fragmented. Nationalist forces held interior strongholds but lost any hope of reclaiming the coastal regions occupied by Japan. The division created a fragile balance. Each power possessed enough territory to deter outright aggression, yet none could dominate the entire Pacific theater. The defeat at Midway altered more than borders. It reshaped technological development, decolonization movements, and the early contours of the Cold War. Without a decisive naval victory, American shipbuilding prioritized escort vessels and anti-submarine warfare over carrier expansion, delaying the emergence of the post-war supercarrier fleet. The Manhattan Project, constrained by lack of delivery options, redirected resources toward developing long-range bombers, a path that would later influence the strategic air doctrine of both East and West. In Asia, Japanese control over resource-rich islands prolonged its exploitation of Southeast Asian commodities, while nationalist movements in colonized territories faced a stronger imperial presence, delaying independence timelines. The Soviet foothold in the Kurils set the stage for enduring territorial disputes with Japan that would echo into the 21st century. Reflecting on this alternate history, we see how a single tactical loss can reverberate through strategy, politics, and society. Midway's real-world triumph gave the United States a platform to project power across the Pacific. Its absence forced a world where compromise replaced conquest, and where the lines drawn in 1944 continued to shape global relations long after the guns fell silent. The lesson remains clear. The outcomes of battles are not isolated moments, but threads woven into the larger tapestry of history.